very, very specific area because Joseph Smith identifies the area as being the Palmyra-Manchester area. Yeah. And if you'll look at Wesley Walters' New Light on Mormon Origins from the Palmyra, New York Revival, he will provide for you documentation that will demonstrate, for example, the denominational magazines of that day were full of reports of revivals, some even devoting a separate section to it. These publications carried over a dozen glowing reports of the revival that broke out at Palmyra in the winter of 1816-17. Likewise, the 1824-25 revivals covered in an equal number of reports. These same magazines, however, while busily engaged in reporting revivals during the 1819 to 1821 period, which is what you're talking about, contain not a single mention of any revival occurring in the Palmyra area during that time. Walters did not say that there were not revivals in New York itself. He was talking about revivals in that area where Joseph Smith himself identified the revival was taking place. And that's why he gives the actual membership records for the individual churches in that area and demonstrates that none of them gained any members that year at all. And yet in 1824, and if you'll hold on until next week, as you already know the information about next week, tying that together with the data that will be talked about next week from Wesley Walters will pretty much prove that the revival spoken of by Joseph Smith was in 1824. That's why, for example, there are already people at BYU who are admitting that that is indeed the case relevant to the first vision and the revival that took place.
Does Mr. Walters have the documents and stuff like that he says he has anyway?
Yes, I've seen them. Yes,
and all that kind of stuff.
Yep, sure does. I've seen them.
Yep.
Okay.
Have you seen them?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Does it show the farms or that, the records and stuff like that?
Yep.
Previous to 1820?
Sure does.
Does it show it after 1824? And so all the way up?
He's examined all of it. Why don't you hold those questions for him next week, because he'll be able to give you a whole lot more information than I do. He's gone into a lot of research into doing a number of other different years and things like that to make sure that his research was accurate, and we'll make sure to talk about that next week. Craig, I'm not cutting you off. I just simply have to go because I'm out of time, okay? Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye. We appreciate all our callers today. Remember, next week, 3 o'clock on the nose, we talk with Reverend Wesley Walters. He will complete our subject as he brings up the new information concerning the first vision and his research into it. We hope that you will be with us. If you would like to contact Alpha and Omega Ministries, you can do so by writing to Alpha and Omega Ministries, Post Office Box 47041, Phoenix, Arizona 85068. And this afternoon, we continue our series on the subject of Joseph Smith's first vision. Today, joined long distance by Reverend Wesley Walters, who will be talking to us about his recent discovery of documents relating to the supposed historicity of the subject of the first vision of Joseph Smith. We invite you to stay tuned as we talk with Reverend Walters right after this. Last week, we began to discuss the subject of Joseph Smith's first vision. We looked over a number of the documents that relate to the first vision. We looked at the personal diaries of Joseph Smith and the writings of the early Mormon church. We looked at Brigham Young's statements on the subject, and we sort of closed things off by looking at the first bombshell that our guest today dropped on the whole subject of the first vision, and that was Reverend Walters' research article from back in, I believe it was 1967, as I recall, and that was published. Isn't that right, Wesley?
That's correct.
Okay, and that was entitled New Light on Mormon Origins from the Palmyra, New York Revival. And today we're going to move on into some more research that Reverend Walters has done on this subject. But before we do so, I wanted to wrap up some subjects from last week now that we have the expert on the phone in this area. And that is at the end of the program last week, Wesley, we had an LDS caller call in. And basically what he said was that he had found evidence and had in fact photocopied out some books at the library here in Mesa, some comments to the fact that there were revivals in the New York area in 1820. Your research indicated that there were no revivals in the specific area of the Palmyra, Manchester area in 1820. Could you maybe help that person understand what it was you were asserting in your original study?
Certainly. There is no question but that there were revivals that were going off like popcorn all over New York State. And we would never attempt to deny that. In fact, when I started my research on the First Vision story about the revivals, I started because I was challenged by a Mormon. I said the First Vision story had been changed, and that led me into looking for revivals, and I actually tried to prove the story was true. But what I discovered was that there was actually no revival of any kind during that 18, 19, 20, 21 period within a 15-mile radius of Joseph Smith. Now, there were a few beyond that. There were a few gains in church membership, and so like the Presbyterian Church saw some signs of revival about 18 miles away in the Oaks Corners Church, but that kind of dwindled out, and it really never came across as a full-fledged revival. There were several people that joined the church about all at the same time, and it looked like it was going to spread, but it really didn't. Joseph Smith's story, where he talks about revivals, the one that they made scripture in 1880 and incorporated in the Pearl of Great Price, it very clearly shows that Joseph Smith was close enough to the revival to be able to drop in on it. Now, when you're on foot and revivals take place at camp meetings lots of times or in evening meetings after chores are all done, you don't just walk 15 miles down the road in the black of the night with no street lights in order to drop in on a revival.
Right.
You have to be close enough to do that. And of course, since then, I have found that Joseph Smith's mother, in her unpublished preliminary draft of her book was published called Biographical Sketches, but the preliminary draft places the revival as being in the local village, in the meeting house, and after Alvin's death. Alvin died in 1823, so that there's no question now that that's so, and even Dr. Marvin Hill of Brigham Young University has conceded that the revival that Joseph spoke of really took place in 1824. But, of course, that throws off his whole story, the official story, out of kilter.
It does indeed. Now, for quite some time now, I've been waiting and impatiently writing you letters and phone calls and all, waiting to find out when all of your most recent research could be put together and presented. And now we're very happy to have you on the line, and you can explain to us your most recent findings relevant to actual historical documents that relate to the various moves the Smith family had. But a lot of our audience is probably not familiar with the Mormon assertion concerning the movements of Joseph Smith and his family, where they lived and things like this. Do you think it would be possible very briefly to explain to our audience what the Mormon Church says the history of Joseph Smith was between about 1814 or so and 1824? What do they currently say happened during that period of time?